Welcome back. You are listening to the home of forbidden romances. Prepare yourself, because tonight's story will leave you breathless. The blue line on the plastic stick didn't just appear. It manifested like a sentence from a judge, condemning him to a life he had spent 24 years running from. Julian gripped the edge of the cracked porcelain sink, his knuckles turning the color of old bone. Outside the dingy motel window, the neon sign of the Sleeping Lotus buzzed with the frantic, dying energy of a trapped insect, casting a rhythmic red glow over his shaking hands. He wasn't safe here. He wasn't safe anywhere. He had thought escaping the penthouse was the hard part. Drugging the guards, disabling the electronic perimeter, sliding down the refuse chute like common trash. But looking at the positive test in his hand, Julian realized the escape had been the easy part. The hard part was what grew inside him. A ticking time bomb sharing the DNA of the most dangerous man in the chaotic underworld of New York City. He had expected fear. He had expected panic. He hadn't expected the sudden, phantom sensation of large, calloused hands on his waist, or the ghost of a scent, wood smoke, expensive scotch, and blood, that made his omega instincts purr in traitorous delight even as his logical mind screamed in terror. A car door slammed outside. Heavy boots crunched on wet gravel. Julian dropped the test into the trash can and reached for the Sig Sauer P226 he'd stolen from the nightstand of his captor. He checked the chamber. 1 bullet. 1 is enough, he whispered to the reflection in the dirty mirror. 1 for him, or 1 for me. To understand how the heir to the Vance crime syndicate ended up shivering in a roadside motel with a stolen gun and a womb full of enemy consequences, one had to understand the war. The Vance family controlled the ports. The Volkov Bratva controlled the streets. For a decade, the blood spilled between the two factions could have filled the Hudson River. Julian Vance was the third son, the quiet one, the strategist. To the world and his brutish father, he was a beta, unremarkable, utilitarian, and expendable. It was a lie carefully constructed with illegal, black market suppressants and a lifetime of discipline. In their world, omegas were currency, bargaining chips to be married off to solidify alliances. Julian had no intention of being sold. He wanted to rule. But plans, much like bones, are easily broken. It had been a trap. The meeting at the abandoned shipyard was supposed to be a peace treaty. Instead, it was an ambush. His father had fled, leaving Julian and his detail to be slaughtered. When the smoke cleared, Julian was the only one left alive, dragged to his knees in the mud before a pair of polished Italian leather shoes. That was the first time he saw Nikolai Volkov up close. The Pakhan of the Volkov Bratva was a terrifying study in contrasts. He wore bespoke suits that cost more than most people's houses, yet his hands were scarred from street brawls. He had the face of a fallen angel and the eyes of a shark, dead, black, and relentless. "So," Nikolai had said, his voice a deep baritone that vibrated in Julian's chest, bypassing his ears entirely. "Old man Vance leaves his puppy behind to die." How distinctively American. Julian had spat blood onto the polished shoes. Better a dead puppy than a live dog on a leash. Nikolai hadn't struck him. He had simply smiled, a cold, predatory curving of lips that promised suffering. "We will see about that." Julian was taken to the penthouse, a fortress of glass and steel overlooking the city Nikolai owned. It wasn't a dungeon. It was a gilded cage. He was locked in a guest room that resembled a 5-star hotel suite, save for the reinforced windows and the lack of door handles on the inside. For 3 days, Nikolai interrogated him. He didn't use pliers or waterboards. He used silence. He used hunger. He sat across from Julian in a velvet armchair, sipping amber liquid from crystal, asking precise questions about shipping routes and laundering contacts. Julian gave him nothing. He held onto his defiance like a shield. But he was running out of time. His suppressants were confiscated along with his clothes and phone. The stress of the capture, combined with the sudden withdrawal of the chemical blockers, was wreaking havoc on his biology. It started as a fever on the 4th evening. A low thrum of heat beneath his skin that made his clothes feel abrasive. The scent of the room became overwhelming. He could smell the ozone of the coming storm outside, the metallic tang of the cleaning solution the maids used, and, most potently, the lingering scent of the alpha who owned this territory. When Nikolai entered the room that night, the air pressure seemed to drop. "You look unwell, little Vance," Nikolai observed, closing the door. The lock clicked with a sound finality that made Julian flinch. "Just the hospitality?" Julian rasped, gripping the arms of his chair. He was sweating, his vision swimming. "The service here is terrible." Nikolai walked closer, his movements predatory and fluid. He stopped a foot away, tilting his head. The alpha flared his nostrils. The mask slipped. Nikolai's expression shifted from cool indifference to sudden, jagged intensity. He stepped into Julian's personal space, inhaling deeply. "You're lying. I don't know what you're talking about," Julian stammered, his heart hammering a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The heat was spiking, turning his blood to lava. A sweet, cloying scent began to waft from his skin. Vanilla and night-blooming jasmine. It was the scent of a distress signal, the biological broadcast of an omega in preheat. "You aren't a beta," Nikolai whispered. The realization seemed to offend him, yet fascinate him. He reached out, his hand hovering near Julian's neck. "You've been masking it." "Why?" "Don't touch me," Julian snarled, slapping the hand away. The contact sent a jolt of electricity through him so potent it nearly knocked him unconscious. Nikolai didn't recoil. He grabbed Julian's wrist, twisting it behind his back and slamming him chest first against the wall. It wasn't a calculated combat move. It was instinct. "You are an omega, and you are going into heat in my territory. Let me go," Julian cried out, but the command lacked conviction. His body was betraying him. The alpha's pheromones were flooding his senses, dominating his will. It was a chemical warfare he had no defense against. Nikolai smelled like command, like safety, like the only thing that could quench the fire burning him alive. "My men. They are downstairs," Nikolai murmured, his voice dropping to a growl near Julian's ear. "If they smell this, I cannot guarantee they will control themselves. An unbonded omega in heat is like blood in the water." "Then kill me," Julian begged, his knees buckling. "Just kill me." "No." Nikolai's hand moved to the nape of Julian's neck, his thumb pressing against the scent gland there. The pressure was excruciatingly pleasurable. "You are valuable leverage. I cannot have you spoiled." The logical part of Nikolai's brain, the part that ran a criminal empire, was warring with the primal alpha within. Logic dictated he sedate the boy and lock him in a sealed room. Instinct dictated he claim what was in front of him. But there was a complication, a twist of fate that neither man had accounted for. Compatibility. In the world of dynamics, compatibility was a myth to most. Fairy tale. But as Nikolai inhaled the jasmine scent, his pupils blew wide, swallowing the iris. His own scent flared in response, aggressive and possessive. It wasn't just lust. It was a biological lock finding its key. "Look at me," Nikolai commanded. He spun Julian around. Julian looked up, his eyes glassy, flushed with fever. He hated this man. He hated what he represented. But his body was screaming mate. "Please," Julian whimpered, hating himself for the word. "Please what?" Nikolai demanded, his restraint fraying like a rope under too much tension. "Please stop? Or please continue?" Julian's hand fisted in Nikolai's shirt. "Make it stop hurting." That was the breaking point. Nikolai kissed him. It wasn't gentle. It was a collision, a claiming. It was the start of a war neither of them would win unscathed. The heat took over, a haze of fever and friction. Julian forgot his name, forgot his father, forgot the gun hidden in the waistband of the guard outside. He only knew the weight of the alpha, the bite of teeth, and the overwhelming, terrifying sensation of being filled, possessed, and irrevocably changed. When the nodding happened, the biological mechanism that locked them together to ensure conception, Julian had cried out, half in pain, half in ecstasy. Nikolai had held him through it, whispering Russian endearments that sounded like prayers or curses. wiping the sweat from Julian's forehead even as he ruined him for anyone else. The morning after had been a cold bucket of water. Julian woke alone in the massive bed, the sheets smelling of sex and musk. The heat had broken, leaving him weak and hollow. The memories crashed down on him. The moans, the begging, the bite mark now throbbing on his neck. He wasn't just a hostage anymore. He was a mated Omega. And worse, he had mated with the enemy of his bloodline. Shame, hot and corrosive, filled his gut. He had to leave, before Nikolai returned. Before the chemical bond solidified into something emotional. Before he lost the will to fight. He found his opportunity 3 weeks later. Nikolai had grown complacent, arrogant in his belief that the mating bite was a leash that would keep Julian docile. He allowed Julian to roam the penthouse. He even left the bedroom door unlocked. Julian used a stolen tablet to hack the security grid, a skill his father had deemed cute, but useless. He drugged the night guard's coffee with crushed sleeping pills found in the bathroom cabinet. He stole cash, a gun, and a coat. He ran. And now here he was, the Sleeping Lotus Motel. Pregnant. The door to the motel room burst open. Julian spun, raising the gun. It wasn't the police. It wasn't a maid. It was Nikolai. He was drenched, his black trench coat dripping water onto the cheap carpet. He looked chaotic, his hair plastered to his forehead, his chest heaving. He didn't have a weapon drawn. He didn't need one. His presence filled the small room, sucking the oxygen out of the air. "You have," Nikolai said, his voice dangerously calm, "caused me a great deal of trouble, Julian." Julian's hands shook, but he kept the gun aimed steady at Nikolai's chest. "Stay back. Put the toy away," Nikolai said, taking a step forward. "You won't shoot me." "I hate you," Julian spat. "You ruined my life. You turned me into this thing." "I turned you into who you are," Nikolai corrected. "I stripped away the lies your father forced you to live. I see you, Julian. I saw you in the dark when you were begging for my knot." "Shut up," Julian screamed, tears pricking his eyes. "I'm leaving. I'm getting rid of it, and I'm disappearing." Nikolai froze. His gaze dropped to the trash can where the pregnancy test lay. Then it snapped back to Julian's stomach, hidden beneath the oversized hoodie. The silence that stretched between them was heavier than lead. "You are pregnant," Nikolai stated. It wasn't a question. "It doesn't matter," Julian said, his voice trembling. "It's nothing. A mistake. A mistake." Nikolai's voice dropped an octave, vibrating with a lethal growl. The air in the room grew heavy with alpha pheromones. Not the seductive scent from the heat, but the terrifying, suffocating scent of a predator protecting its territory. "That is my air. That is my blood. It's my body. And you are my mate," Nikolai roared, closing the distance before Julian could react. He slapped the gun from Julian's hand, the weapon skittering under the bed. He pinned Julian against the peeling wallpaper, his forearm across Julian's chest. "You think you can run? You think you can hide this from me? You carry the Union of the North and the South in your belly." "My father will kill it," Julian gasped, struggling against the hold. "If he finds out, he'll cut it out of me. He'd rather see me dead than breeding with a Volkov." Nikolai's expression shifted. The rage remained, but something else flickered behind it. Possessiveness. A dark, twisted form of protectiveness. "Let him try," Nikolai whispered, leaning in until his forehead rested against Julian's. "Let him come. I will burn this city to ash before I let him touch a hair on your head." "Why?" Julian sobbed, the fight draining out of him as the proximity to his mate began to soothe his distressed biology. "I'm just leverage. I'm just a pawn." "You were leverage," Nikolai corrected, his hand moving down to cover Julian's stomach, his palm large and warm. Now you are the only thing that matters. You are the weakness I cannot afford, and the strength I cannot live without." Julian looked into the black eyes of the monster who had ruined him, and saw the truth. Nikolai wasn't lying. This wasn't a game of chess anymore. This was primal. "Come home," Nikolai said, softer now. "The car is outside. No more running. If I go back," Julian whispered, "I'll never be free." "Freedom is an illusion, little wolf," Nikolai murmured, brushing a wet strand of hair from Julian's face. "But power? Power is real. Come back, stand by my side, and we will take everything. Your father's empire, my enemies. We will crush them all. For the child." Julian hesitated. He thought of the lonely road, the cold motel rooms, the fear of his father's hitmen. Then he thought of the heat, the bond, the terrifying safety of Nikolai's arms. He was an Omega. He was pregnant. But he was also a Vance. He craved power. And looking at the man who would burn the world for him, he realized that perhaps the cage wasn't a prison. Perhaps it was a throne room. "If you ever lie to me again," Julian whispered, "I will use the gun next time." Nikolai smirked, the expression sharp and dangerous. "I look forward to it." He scooped Julian up into his arms, carrying him out into the rain, away from the neon lights of the motel, and back into the darkness where they both belonged. The return to the penthouse was different this time. Julian wasn't dragged in handcuffs. He walked in at Nikolai's side, his hand resting protectively over his stomach. The guards averted their eyes, sensing the shift in the hierarchy. The Omega was no longer a prisoner. He was the queen on the chessboard. But peace in the underworld is short-lived. 2 months later, the attack came. Julian was in the library, reading a book on prenatal nutrition that Nikolai had awkwardly left on the nightstand, when the glass of the balcony shattered. Men in black tactical gear swung in on ropes. The insignia on their chests was unmistakable. The Vance Viper. His father had found him. Julian didn't scream. He dropped to the floor, crawling behind the heavy oak desk. He heard the door burst open. Gunfire erupted loud, deafening bursts that shredded the expensive decor. "Find the boy!" a voice barked. It was his brother, Marcus. "Father wants him alive. The bastard inside him dies." Julian drew the small pistol Nikolai had given him, a replacement for the one he'd lost. He curled around his stomach, his heart pounding in his throat. Then the hallway exploded. Nikolai entered the fray like a demon summoned from the abyss. He wore only his dress shirt and slacks, a submachine gun in one hand and a combat knife in the other. He didn't seek cover. He moved with a terrifying grace, cutting down the intruders with precise, brutal efficiency. "Nikolai!" Julian screamed as a laser sight swept across the room. Nikolai vaulted over the sofa, sliding across the floor to shield Julian with his own body. He fired blindly over the desk, suppressing the attackers. "Are you hurt?" Nikolai demanded, checking Julian over with frantic hands. Blood dripped from a graze on Nikolai's cheek. "No," Julian gasped. "It's Marcus, my brother." "Good," Nikolai snarled, reloading his weapon. "I prefer to kill family. It's more personal. There's too many of them." "Julian, look at me." Nikolai grabbed his face, forcing eye contact amidst the chaos. "Do you trust me?" "What? Do you trust me?" It was a ridiculous question. This man had kidnapped him, impregnated him, and dragged him into a war. But as bullets chipped away the wood of the desk above their heads, Julian felt the bond in his chest hum with absolute certainty. "Yes," Julian breathed. "Then stay down. Covering fire only." Nikolai stood up. What followed was not a gunfight. It was a massacre. Nikolai Volkov unleashed the full fury of an alpha defending his mate. He moved through the room, a blur of violence. He took a bullet to the shoulder and didn't even flinch. He reached Marcus, disarmed him, and threw him through the shattered balcony doors with a roar that shook the glass. When silence finally fell, the room was a ruin of smoke and bodies. Nikolai stood in the center of the carnage, his chest heaving, blood soaking his white shirt. He turned slowly to look at Julian. The shark eyes were gone. In them was only relief and a burning, terrifying adoration. Julian stood up, his legs shaking. He walked over the debris, stepping over the bodies of the men his father had sent. He reached Nikolai and placed his hand over the bleeding wound on the Alpha's shoulder. "You're bleeding," Julian said softly. "I don't feel it," Nikolai rasped, dropping his gun to cup Julian's face with bloody hands. He pressed his forehead against Julian's. "You are safe. The air is safe." "We need a doctor," Julian said, but he didn't pull away. He leaned into the touch, the scent of blood and gunpowder now smelling like home. "Later," Nikolai murmured. "First, I need to send a message to your father." "What message?" Nikolai looked towards the broken balcony, where the storm raged outside. "That he missed, and that the next time he sees his son, it will be when you are standing over his grave, holding my hand." Julian looked down at his stomach, then up at the man who had destroyed his world only to build a new, darker one in its place. He realized with a jolt that he didn't want to be rescued. He didn't want to go back to being the invisible beta son. He was the mate of the Bratva Pakhan. And God help anyone who tried to take that away from him. "Let's make it a closed casket," Julian said, his voice cold and steady. Nikolai smiled, and for the first time, it reached his eyes. "As you wish, moi malenki vok, my little wolf." And that is how the viper tamed the wolf. If you enjoyed seeing Nikolai tear the world apart for his mate, destroy that like button. And tell me in the comments, would you forgive a man who kidnapped you if he protected you with his life? I'll be reading your answers. Subscribe for the next chapter. Until then.